This is At Risk Radio.
Welcome to At Risk Radio. At Risk Radio is a show where we talk about leadership in the church at risk. My name is Mark Stafford, and I'm the host of the show. I'm here with David Witt, the CEO of SOM International, and with Naghmeh Panahi. She is from Iran, has the website naghmehpanahi.com. She works with and has been a part of the persecuted church in Iran. That brings us to her connection with you, David. Tell me about your connection with Naghmeh and her ministry.
It is a blessing today. Naghmeh is one of my heroes of faith and a champion for the persecuted church, and was able to pray for her in the past of persecution in Iran with her husband then, who was in prison. Many have maybe remember that story. And then she has even some mutual friends that we had that she heard about spirit of martyrdom. And so just last week, out of all places, we were in Ohio together, in Indiana, speaking to a lot of Amish and Mennonites, and had our socks blessed off by their hearts. So, Naghmeh, welcome. What a blessing to have you. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. I'd actually heard about you long before we met. We have mutual friends, like you said, in Florida, North Carolina, and Washington State. So
yeah, through the years, they'd tell me, "Oh, you got to connect with Naghmeh," and I said, "Well, I'm praying for her." And and then I remember in some of the days of all that crisis of persecution, we exchanged a couple letters of just encouragement, of emails. I know when you were getting thousands, tens of thousands, so one of mine would have been in there. But finally, the Lord put our paths together, and we've been able to meet directly and share the podium together in that conference we were just at. By the way, any encouragement for our listening audience of what you saw the Lord even doing among the Amish and Mennonites that we were just with? We hadn't even talked about that.
Yeah, I mean, that was my first time. I definitely made some mistakes. I didn't realize you should not be taking photos. Some of their belief is not to be, take photos of them. But I was really encouraged by their heart for mission. And they listened for hours. They were engaged. They really, really have a heart to see the gospel go all over the world. And that was really encouraging to me.
Also, I'll just let our listening audience know, they had a starting, Mark, at 5 p.m. I was kind of the leadoff guy. Yeah. And 5 speakers, and we're ending at 9:30 at night with no breaks. Oh my goodness! Nobody left. It was amazing. I thought, man, these people love the Lord and they love Jesus, and they just really soaked in the stories and responded well. I hope our listening audience is encouraged that God is working in many ways in many different cultures and denominations out there, and a unity for Christ in the globe, and specifically the persecuted church here. So it's such a blessing to Naghmeh. You're part of that really first generation believers coming out of the Middle East, Iran specifically. I was just captivated by your book, and I just hope people get your book, bottom line, because it's just so much there. We're only going to be able to barely touch on it during our podcast here. But I'd love for you to share some of those highlights of your story, maybe just, lay that foundation of what was happening there, quick context in Iran, come to the United States, and the day you and your brother met the Lord. I mean, that's an amazing story. So land us there, if you would. Yeah,
I was born in a very interesting time. I was born 2 years before the Islamic Revolution. And so I was born in 1977. I was in an interesting household. Both my parents were Muslim. They were, my last name is Shariat. My full last name is Shariat Panahi, which means protector of the Islamic law. And so that from both sides of the family, I was told we go back to the Prophet of Islam, our descendants, our bloodline. And so my dad, especially, who was a strong Muslim, was very proud of that. And so grew up in a very strong Muslim household that was proud of our last name. That meant we were related to the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad. When I was born, my mom, she had her own beliefs as a Muslim. She definitely considered herself Muslim, but she didn't wear the head covering. She didn't follow a lot of the rules. She believed, I have a relationship with God. I don't need to be following all these rules. She had created her own little belief system. My dad now, having seen Iran in the 60s and 70s where women were partying. There was the discos, there was the drug scene. Iran looked pretty much like Europe and America with the short skirts, with everything, with the 60s. And so he really believed that Islamic revolution was going to solve a lot of the problems and make Iran more holy or better. And actually people would do better financially as well. And so soon after I was born, 2 years after I was born, the Islamic revolution happened. Now, Iran had been a Muslim country for 1400 years since Islam took over. But in 1979, Islam became the law of the land. So it really changed everything. So if you didn't wear a head covering, that was illegal because it became the law. It was no longer just the practice. And a year after that, the war with Iran and Iraq started. And I grew up in a lot of chaos and seeing deaths and bombs, missiles, and until I was 9. And there was actually, I would say, a few factors that had my family flee Iran and come to America. One was soon after the Islamic Revolution, my uncle, who was a teenager, my dad's brother, youngest brother, was arrested by the Iranian government because he was an opposing political party. And when my uncle turned 18, my grandma was called, and he was the youngest. He was loved by the whole family. And so when he turned 18, my grandma was called and told, your son has been set free. He's free. Come get him. And when my grandma went to get him, they had killed him. And so that's when my dad realized, what did I just do? I helped bring the Islamic revolution, but there's something, maybe they're not all good. And then also,
Now, the Islamic Revolution, just because I'm kind of a layman when it comes to these things, is that the war between Iran and Iraq, or is it referring to something different than that?
No, but the war with Iran and Iraq happened right around that time. So Islamic Revolution happened in 1979, where Iran had already been a Muslim country for 1400 years. And like you said, there's a history with Iran where it used to be called Persia. So Islam came to the Middle East 600 years after Christianity. So the gospel had already spread in that region. Iran was one of the first. Persians were one of the first people to become Christians at the day of Pentecost in the book of Acts too. So Parthites, Medes, Elamites. So Iran had a rich history with Christianity and Jews, of course, King Cyrus, King Darius, Esther, Daniel. But 1400 years, Islam had taken over. But in 1979, the Islamic Revolution made Iran officially a Muslim country, which meant all the Islamic laws, if you converted from Islam to any other religion, death penalty. If you drank alcohol, lashes or possibly death penalty. The law of whatever was in the Quran became the law of the land. So if the woman didn't wear her head covering, that was illegal. If you didn't fast during the month of Ramadan, if you ate something, that was illegal. Whereas before the Islamic Revolution, even though Iran or Persia had become Muslim, it wasn't illegal. It was not necessarily breaking a law if you didn't follow all the Islamic rules. But after the revolution, it became the law. And then a year after the revolution, the war with Iraq started, which I think because Iran was in a very unstable situation with the revolution, Iraq kind of wanted to take some land and use that opportunity to attack Iran.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That brings us some context. Well, hey, I think at that point, let's run to a break real quick, and we'll pick up this story in just a minute right after the break. Does that sound good, David?
Yep. Well,
all right.
There's a lot more of the story coming.
There's a lot more to come. We'll be right back. Are you aware of the impact of Lighthouse discipleship and sewing schools? Hey, this is Mark from At Risk Radio. Imagine with me the difficulty of today's women in India and North Africa. They're illiterate, they lack trade skills, they're impoverished, they're persecuted for their faith, and they're vulnerable to abuse. Lighthouse schools give the gift of hope. These schools provide widows and at-risk women with tools to start a micro business. These women who are new to faith in Christ learn sewing skills along with biblical discipleship. You empower them to share the light of Christ. Listen to Sodama's story.
I am privileged to be the only woman in my village with a sewing trade. Within 6 months of training, I made many connections in the village, and people are listening to my testimony about Jesus as I sew their clothes. Despite the persecution and threats, I am able to secretly meet other women and disciple them in knowing Christ.
Support women like Sodama in Asia and North Africa with just $150 for a new sewing machine, or $280 gets her 6 months of training in biblical discipleship, along with some sewing skills. Go to spiritofmartyrdom.com to donate today.
At Risk Radio.
Welcome back to At Risk Radio. I'm online with David Witt, the CEO of SOM International, and with Naghmeh. And Naghmeh, you were just telling us about the Islamic Revolution, and then you were able to come to the States and you found Christ. Let me hear a little bit about your testimony about how you came from being a follower of Islam to being a follower of Jesus.
Yeah. So when I was in Iran, the war and the revolution had me and my twin brother question, who is God and why is he allowing this? Does he hate us? So we had a lot of questions about God. And then when we left Iran because of the war and other things, we landed in actually the Bay Area in San Jose. Okay. And it was around that time that it was a few weeks after we had arrived where my brother, who is now has a doctorate in quantum physics. And the reason I say that, he's very mathematical. He's not a very emotional person. Even during the war and revolution, he was not emotional. When we came to America for the first time, I see my brother weeping, running to me and weeping. And
why is that?
He ran to me and he said, Naghmeh, I found the God we've been looking for. His name is Jesus. Oh, wow. And so
that's huge.
Yeah, that was shocking to me because of his emotion. I've never had dreams.
You haven't seen that before.
I hadn't seen that before. Yeah. Especially coming from my twin brother, we were very close.
Yeah.
Having been raised.
And I remember you saying he was in the living room, right? And it was a vision, or I even felt like the presence of him. And he said, I think he was surrounded by love, he said, right?
Yeah, because our question in Iran with the war was, does God hate us? We were taught about a God that was vengeful. And so that was our idea of God and questions of why war was happening. And so when he ran to me, I was in the living room. He came down the hallway and he said, I found the God we've been looking for. His name's Jesus. I'm like, what? Because having been raised in Islamic revolution and war, you don't really hear about Christianity. And also at that time in Iran, there was not a lot of Christians. So he said, I saw him. So he had seen a vision of Jesus. And he said, he loves us. God loves us. Like, I know this. All I felt was pure love. And we need to discover who Jesus is. And that's where started our journey of asking people who Jesus was. My dad was on a business trip. My mom had been taken out to go grocery shopping or something. And so we were told who Jesus was, and we were given a Bible.
And I want to jump in, Naghmeh, because in your book, it was so sweet how you talked about you literally ran up to the neighbors and was asking everybody, can you tell us who Jesus is, right?
Yeah, we wanted to know who he was. We'd never heard about his name. And so we were able to sit down and have a group of people tell us who Jesus was. We were in like a apartment complex that had a swimming pool in the middle of it. And we were told who Jesus was given a Bible that was Psalm, New Testament. And that's key in my testimony because I started reading Psalm when I got saved, and then my Bible was taken away from me. But so we were given a Bible. We were baptized in that swimming pool because my brother, he was so excited after the gospel was shared with us. He said, and they said, and you're baptized to, show a certain of time. He's like, where can I get baptized? And literally we went straight to the swimming pool and got baptized. Wow. And then we got home. We were excited. We started reading our Bible, and I read Psalm 2, where I read up to Psalm 2. I read Psalm 1, and then I read Psalm 2, where it says, I think verses 7 and 8 says, today I have begotten you, ask of me, and I will give you the nations as your inheritance. And that's this verse I stopped at because my mom came home and took my Bible. So that's the only verse I remembered until I was 18, until I had my Bible when I went to college. I didn't have a Bible until I went to college.
So how did your parents react to your newfound pursuit of Jesus? That must have been, obviously they took away your Bible, but you can't expand on that. How did they feel about that? Yeah,
my mom took away my Bible. Then my dad came, me and my brother's Bibles. My dad came home and he was very upset. He actually wanted to have us go back to the war, which at that time, the war was at its worst. There was chemical warfare. There was...
Oh, really?
I didn't share this in my testimony, but boys as young as my brother were being recruited to go and run through mines. And so my dad
wow.
was afraid. That's one of the reasons we had fled, was my brother was about to sign up to go through the mines in the and die for jihad, for the holy war. And so, my dad, even with all of that, he said, we're going to go back. You've lost your culture. You've lost your religion. He was very angry. I'm saying it in a very calm voice right now.
Yeah, but he was not happy
He was
at all.
not talking like this. And that's how we actually ended up in Idaho. I had an uncle that had just graduated from a university in California. And he said, this is such a drastic step to take your family back into like a deadly war. 1 million people had died. And the war was inside the country. That means where we lived, there was bombs and missiles. It wasn't like somewhere different. And so he said, I found a job in a place called Boise, Idaho. Why don't you give that a try? And it seems like it's in the middle of nowhere. These, the kids will not have any connections with Christians. They're going to forget about Jesus. They're only 9 years old. And so my parents took away our Bible. They moved us to Idaho. We got a house in the middle of nowhere. And they tried for the next 9 years. Well, the next 7 years. After 7 years, they let up a little bit. And later I realized when I was 16, they had actually started reading the Bible that they had taken away from us. But for 7 years straight, they tried to convert us back to Islam. And by God's grace, we kept our faith, and they wouldn't let us go to church. They wouldn't let us have a Bible. They wouldn't let us have Christian friends. They just were watching us and trying to de-brainwash us back into Islam. They thought the Christians in California had brainwashed us, so they brought us to Idaho. And 6 years of that. And then when I was 16, I started sneaking out to a church near my house. But at that time, I realized I think my family noticed I was doing that, but they weren't doing anything about it. And later I found out they were actually starting to read the Bible, and they had gone through my mom had gone through some depression. My dad had gone through some stuff. So they had started secretly reading the Bibles they had taken away from us. But I didn't have a Bible from age 9 until I went to college. And all I remembered was that verse in Psalm, that today I've begotten you, ask of me, and I will give you the nations. And that was a prayer I prayed as a 9-year-old all the time, from 9 until on forever, till probably my 30s. That was a prayer I prayed. Yeah.
I loved, again, here, Naghmeh, how you are bringing up just the missional heart of God, that God was after you and your brother. And just, he was your discipler, as even Paul was discipled and won by Christ himself. So truly, you are not conventional in your walk with the Lord. And I think that's what I caught through your book too, how much you truly love Jesus. It's not a denomination, institution, it's not even people, because you've been disappointed and hurt by a lot of people. But one person who hasn't hurt you, who's loved you, is Jesus. And that is the strength I've seen in your leadership to the global church. So I just wanted to highlight that.
He really was my everything, is my everything. And he's really better than everything. And I think that's, as Christians, I read a book called Holiness by, I think J.C. Riles, or.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's quite a book, actually. Yeah.
And it talks about, if you can't enjoy Jesus now, you're not going to enjoy heaven, because heaven is all about him. And so, it's been, I think God gives us our faith, and he keeps our faith, because as a 9-year-old wanting to please her parents, I should have been easily de-brainwashed back to Islam. But the journey continued. My faith, I would say, grew. I would say I was still a baby Christian even though I was in the Lord for 9 years, I was still somewhat of a baby Christian, because I didn't have access to other Christians, to the Bible. Right. I didn't really know much about prayer life or devotionals. But college, I got involved with a group called InterVarsity, and they really discipled me. I didn't know that. I was assigned someone to disciple me. And those years I really grew. I learned about having quiet time with God and prayer and reading my Bible daily, and also just fellowshipping with other Christians. I loved going to church, even though I went to a very liberal university, and my professors, I was studying pre-med, they would say, Naghmeh is so smart. Why does she believe in this Jesus? Why does she hold Bible studies in her dorm? I was known as the evangelist in college, and I just shared my faith. I was excited to be in college, not realizing I'd gone to a very secular, also party college. And here I was just talking to everyone about Jesus. But graduated with pre-med. My brother went on to get his doctorate in quantum physics. And growing up in an immigrant family, it's like pursue the American dream. We're here in America to get rich and do well and forget about all the war and chaos back home. And so, yeah, I was on that journey to become a doctor when God called me back to Iran.
And I think that's a great place for us to get to the next episode. And so when we go to part 2, let's talk about God's calling in your life to go back to Iran and what the Lord unfolded there. And so before we let you go for episode 1, Naghmeh, tell me a little bit about how somebody can get a hold of your book, how they can follow you on Instagram, on Facebook, if you're on social, if you're on a website, how do people connect with you?
Just my name, Naghmeh Panahi.
Okay.
Yeah.
Naghmeh Panahi. Okay.
Yeah.
Is that .com?
Yeah, there's a website, naghmehpanahi.com. But if you search my name, my book will come up, my social media will come up.
Perfect. Well, we'll put that in the show notes to make sure that we have that all spelled correctly and everything, naghmehpanahi.com. So, hey, we want to encourage you, our listener, in being a better leader in the kingdom of God. And we try to provide these resources where we have people who are risking much for Jesus, who are giving their testimonies. And so, but the first way you can get involved in those who are risking much for Jesus is by subscribing to our newsletter. Our newsletter is full color, comes out every month, and it has reports and news from those who are doing ministry in the most restrictive areas in the world for the gospel. You can sign up for that at riskradio.com. Hey, you can help with this podcast by subscribing, by sharing it with a friend. That helps, of course, the algorithm and that sort of thing, so other people are able to hear about this podcast. And lastly, At Risk Radio and SOM International are crowdfunded ministries, so we're supported as you are signing up to be a monthly donor or as you buy books in our bookstore. Well, it's more of an exchange for a donation. You donate to the bookstore, we send you a book, and that's at sombookstore.com. David, do you have any last words before we sign out today?
No, I just want to encourage everybody to hang on and listen to the next episode coming out, because we're going to get into the underground church work in Iran and hear what God's even doing today. So please come back in our next release.
All right. Until next time, my name's Mark, and this has been At Risk Radio.
You've been listening to At Risk Radio. For more, go to atriskradio.com. At Risk Radio is a production of SOM International.